So take it from there. We're all looking forward to your talk. Thank you, Colette.
Thank you very much. And look, thank you to the iCatch Hub Network as well for inviting me to speak on invasive species tonight. And can I just take, can you see my slide okay? Great, thank you very much. So look, I suppose, yes, here tonight to talk about riparian and aquatic species and like the threats of them and the responses that we need. Look, this is a general kind of overview talk. I suppose I'm not sure of the backgrounds of different people, so hopefully somebody will find something of interest on it. And really, I do look forward to discussion as well at the end, where I think we can really learn as well from the river trusts and these different networks, the challenges that are facing or the information gaps, and what supports we might be able to offer and link in together. So I just want to start with a kind of an opening slide, one that will be coming from a biosecurity course that we have. And really, it's to help with how we think about invasive species in the landscape. This question is, which of these actions has the potential to be most harmful to the environment? Is it disposing of an unusual plant from your pond by throwing it into a nearby river or lake, throwing 20 litres of paint down the drain, or dumping an old fridge in a lay-by? And the answer is the first one, disposing of an unusual plant into a pond or nearby river and lake. And the reason is this plant is Lagerisiphen major, this one example here. This is a plant that we now find in Ireland in the wild in not too many places. It was sold as an oxygenating plant in our ponds, but it's now banned from sale. But in this image here, you can show the top part is Lough Corrib, Rinneroon Bay, Lough Corrib, one of our largest lakes in Ireland, before infestation. And the image below shows post-infestation of this Lagerisiphen major. And what does it do? Like many invasives, it comes in, it takes over, it dominates. In this instance, it has excluded native vegetation in many parts of where it dominates. And that has, they know from research studies, has disrupted the food web as well. Not only that, I suppose, but there's other impacts on humans as well. This part would have been considered one of Ireland's greatest fly fishing destinations, but look, nobody's going to go casting into that. So now you're impacting on people's recreational enjoyment, but also perhaps on local tourism and the economy in that regard. So what we're seeing here is, look, while certainly look, putting paint into a river or dumping on the side of a river or a lay-by there, they are polluting events, but they tend to be short-term and there can be a recovery in the system. But often with invasive species, particularly in the aquatic environment, they are next to impossible to get rid of. And they can have multiple impacts and negative effects as well on both biodiversity, the ecosystems, and on people's enjoyment of nature. So look, what's very important when we talk about invasive species really is what are they exactly? So look, in our context in Ireland, they're alien to Ireland and they're only here because of human intervention. This is very important. Either that's intentional introduction or unintentional introduction. And once here, they not only survive, but they absolutely thrive and they spread and they cause a negative impact, either on our wildlife, environment, the economy, or the way we live. And often it's a case they do this because, look, they're not from this area. They are free from whatever was keeping them in check in their native range, whether that be extreme environmental conditions or they're free from any parasites or predators. And often they're also at an advantage here in their introduced areas. For instance, like they germinate first, as in the case of giant rhubarb. They have multiple impacts, and I'll just go through kind of some examples of those. So one is on their interactions with species. This is a photo of American mink actually predating on a gannet chick from Scotland. It is in Scotland, but I don't have many photos. I couldn't come across many photos of that happening here in Ireland, but it is a striking image. But we do know that they are a big issue for predation of birds, and particularly along kind of flood areas and the Shannon Callows, where there is eradication work going on and an ongoing control throughout the country. They also come in and compete for space and resources. We have like Lagerisiphen major, but also this is a photo. Actually, this large mussel is a native mussel, either a duck or a swan mussel. And what's on it are zebra mussels. So this non-native invasive species that settle on hard substrates. And what's even settled on those zebra mussels are more zebra mussels, more juvenile ones. And this is what they'll do. They'll come in and they'll compete with them for space, for resources, and even on them. And in this instance, that mussel as well, it will die too, because it won't be able to open and to filter feed. There can also be introduced parasites or pathogens. And in recent years, we've had a very, I suppose, an awful outbreak really of crayfish plague in Ireland. We know there have been at least 4 separate introduction events because there are 4 different genetic types have come in. This comes in and it will wipe out the white-clawed crayfish from the infected water bodies. And our white-clawed crayfish is a protected species in Ireland. And Ireland was seen as a safe haven really in Europe for this species. It will come in, it will wipe them out, and it will survive in the water once there is a host there. But importantly, how could it get here? Well, it can survive in damp conditions for up to 21 days, this plague. So you think about the potential for it on damp angling equipment, in bilge water, boats, or whatever it may be, that there are lots of possible ways this could have been introduced to Ireland. In other countries, it's introduced with species that are hosts of it but don't succumb to it, like North American crayfish species, but we haven't found any of those to date in Ireland. So it's likely it was brought in on other vectors such as damp or equipment or wet water from infected areas. Can also change our habitats, like the lagrosiphon in Lough Corrib that we spoke about, by reducing light availability. And I suppose another well-known case would be like Rhododendron ponticum. It can change the substrate. So this is an example of Asian clam that's here now for many years in Ireland and spreading throughout the Shannon catchment and beyond. So that will do is create, when it's in mass numbers and thousands per cubic square, quickly change the substrate from a nice gravelly riverbed to a pseudo feces that it kind of deposits, making it rather silty, which isn't suitable then for spawning grounds of our trout and salmon. And then the ecosystem functioning and services it can impact on, like destabilizing riverbanks, exacerbating flooding, changing soil fertility, nutrient cycling, and just affecting water quality. I mean, it is listed as one of the drivers of impact on the classification of the quality of our waters in Ireland, although it does tend to be quite low down on the list. And also direct human impact, really. I mean, from whether you're trying to access a site that has the Himalayan balsam or giant hogweed or Japanese knotweed, clogging our waterways, so it's becoming an issue for recreational use and boating. This photo here in the middle is a person's arm where they've had a burn from the giant hogweed, and like really you can get anything from a mild irritation to 3rd degree burning. And also just where it can access other elements such as ground services and income, particularly with the knotweeds that need removal, although there is a lot of scaremongering around them. And the economic impact, and would be interested to see some of the other reports that are available, but just some figures here. From a recent iPES report out in 2023, the global annual cost now of invasive species is $423 billion. And they've seen it quadruple every decade since 1970. In Europe, the cost was estimated at 12 billion per year on control and damage. And in that report, it's even estimated as being, they considered it an underestimate. In Ireland in 2013, the estimate was at 202 million a year. And the highest impacting species in Britain recently, when they just kind of looked at a species level, was a Japanese knotweed at 166 million per year. And just some examples, I suppose, even just for one site in Ireland where the council wanted to develop it for a nursing home, there was 1,000 cubic meters of Japanese knotweed of soil and spoil that had to be removed off site for disposal at a deep landfill. And luckily they had a landfill very close by that could accept it, which is highly unusual now in Ireland. But the cost of that removal and disposal in a biosecure manner was 330,000, you know, so before you even go to put in a foundation or do any other site work. So they are quite costly economically. But the question is, do all invasive species, do all alien species become invasive? And we can tell what ones do from risk assessment. And some other of our species we list as invasive in Ireland is because they are deemed so under regulation. But what we know from assessments in 2012, that we have about 48 high impact invading species in Ireland, about another 79 were at medium risk of impact, and many assessed at low risk of impact. But I must stress this was done a good number of years ago, and we're hoping to repeat that study soon. And in general, we find that the majority of those species are in the terrestrial environment, with about 1/5 in the freshwater and about 12% in the marine. Again, a lot less is known perhaps about the marine because it's less well studied, but as with anything, the more we study, the more we might find out, and those figures would change. And again, in general, we find the majority are plants, again, to do with the history perhaps of bringing over plants for our gardens. And we have many vertebrates and invertebrate introductions as well, and others which are like fungus and pathogens. Some of the recent kind of aquatic invaders from 2001 to 2020 include these like floating pennywort, muskrat, the Caspian mud shrimp, Chinese mitten crab, chub, the crayfish plague I mentioned. Also a yabby, although that's not considered invasive, and it is found in one closed environment. Bloody red shrimp, Asian clam, more recently quagga mussels, and kaipu, which have undergone eradication, although we still get the odd anecdotal sighting. So we are seeing, like, just in those number of years, and this is just a selection of the aquatic invaders that have come in a horizon scan exercise. So you're trying to predict what might come in, what might establish, what might have a high impact, so you can prepare to respond in advance for those. An exercise was undertaken in 2018, and that showed in the top 10, just really to show you here, and that in the top 10 of those, the majority are for the freshwater environment. And since then, we already have the quagga mussel and the Chinese mitten crab being detected in Ireland. And why do we have this trend of invasive species? Why do we have this amount coming in? Well, really because we have an increased movement of people and goods around the world. And so there is an increased risk of introduction of invasive species. And what we've also seen from trend analysis, that 4 times as many invasive species were recorded in Ireland in the 20th century as in the previous one. And so far from what we're logging, although we haven't, I suppose, systematically analysed it yet, we're seeing a very much an increase on that trend again already for this century. So what do we need to do to tackle the threat of invasive species? There is a recognised internationally kind of hierarchical approach to it, and it's all very logical. You need to prevent them getting here to begin with. You know, they're non-native. They shouldn't be here. So we must take action to prevent them. And again, this is where the definition is important. They're only here because of human activity. So what human activity is bringing them in, and how can we prevent it, either through regulation or biosecurity actions? If we fail to introduce them into Ireland, for instance, we have to have systems in place to detect them as soon as possible and to alert and report of those sightings. And that's to give the best chance to kind of rapidly respond to eradicate them before they establish or to become too widely spread. Failing that, and even where sometimes eradication is not technically feasible or possible, you're often looking at just containing and long-term control of those species. And this is the least desirable option, because really our effectiveness, we've better chance of being most effective as we at the top of this hierarchy in our prevention. That effectiveness decreases as we go through the steps, but the cost increases greatly. And therefore, what we need to be doing really is moving to proportionately spending more on prevention measures and putting more effort into prevention. We still need to continue to put money and effort into detection and containment and management, and even probably more than what's going in now. But we really do need to seriously take prevention more seriously and input into that. So what's important when we want to prevent them is knowing, well, how did they get here? As I say, it's because of human activity, intentional or otherwise. And what we're seeing coming in is either whole animals or plants, or their reproducing parts like eggs or seeds. And these all need to be addressed. We know from our analysis that the majority of these are coming in from, well, historically, actually horticulture and plant trade, but also angling, other water sport activities, boating and sailing, aquaculture. There are some risks there. The exotic pet trade, even more so in recent years. Also just movement of soil and spoil, and the aquarium trade. And it's not just how they're being brought into Ireland, but when we think of prevention, then we also must start to consider how do we prevent them being even further spread in Ireland, and where that's possible. Because I suppose once they're here, there is natural dispersal, and they can also be escaped. They can also escape and be released. So we look at kind of the different elements of action we can take, and one is at the pre-border. So where we know a species is a traded species, we know it has a high risk for this country, say for instance, or for the island, let's look at banning their import. Let's regulate that. And then kind of to look to address the unintentional introduction. So for instance, if there was going to be an international angling competition in Ireland, you know, before those people sign up, or when they sign up, before they come here, make them aware you need to make sure your gear is clean before you come to Ireland. And when they get here, perhaps have checking of that. You know, so there are different awareness and biosecurity actions we can put in place. At our borders, we have to put the capacity at our borders to check for species that are already banned, and for other contaminants that could be of risk as well, but to have checks in place. And what I would love to see is that we also have checks for vehicles, for boats, for kind of what could be contaminated and all that. We're an island, we have the opportunity to put in better protection. And post-border within the country, I suppose in general, it's just about being aware of the biosecurity actions we all could be taking in our work or in our play. And we have some campaigns, particularly the Check Clean Dry campaign, and Being Plant Wise and Being Pet Wise. And I'll mention a little bit about those further on. Fortunately, I suppose being in Europe, we do have a European regulation on invasive alien species that was brought in on the 1st of January 2015. And this sets out articles whereby all member states are obliged to implement all aspects of this regulation. It's a strong regulation. Those actions centre around the list of union concerned species. That list has been increasing over the years, and it's now at 88, and more will be added as time comes in. And it's roughly about half animals and half plants. And what it says that for all these species, they cannot be traded in, they can't be imported into Europe, they can't be traded or transported within Europe. If you already have them as a pet within a certain deadline, you can keep them until the end of their natural life, but you cannot allow them to escape or reproduce. You must have systems in place to detect these species, so surveillance and monitoring. And if they do occur in your environment, so in Ireland, you know, you must attempt to eradicate them. If you can't eradicate them, and if they're already widely spread, like our giant hogweed and our Himalayan balsam, you know, you must take action to control those populations to mitigate their impact. So it's quite a strong regulation, and it's good we have it. As part of that, I say, is addressing this unintentional introduction and spread of these invasive species. And while it centres around the union concerned ones, any action we take on those union concerned species will, of course, also benefit in preventing the introduction and spread of other species too, through this unintentional ways. Ireland has already produced 3 action plans, one for recreational boating and watercraft, one for angling, and one for silent stone. And just briefly, say, again, it's around biosecurity. For the aquatic ones, it's about checking, cleaning and drying. And for the silent stone, really, it's about looking at your practices on site, what you might be bringing, what you might be moving around, and having good site hygiene. Sorry, just click on. Just say, look, they are available to download from invasives.ie, but there is kind of a simple infographic as well, you know, as an angler, kind of like trying to help identify what are your risks, you know, are my activities very high risk, or low risk, and what actions can I take? And a lot of it is about those actions in the plan, raising awareness on site measures, looking at policy and coordination and reporting. And in developing these pathway action plans, I suppose, worked with a wide group of stakeholders, including government and agencies, but also, I suppose, representative organisations for the different sectors. And that goes as well for the boating pathway action plan. They are both very similar, and that's intentional. And again, kind of an infographic of the steps you could take. And of course, not only do we not want to introduce these species or cause their spread, but there's also an element that you want to avoid committing an offence. So under the European Community's Birds and Natural Habitats Regulations of 2011 and Regulation 49, for animals, it's basically saying any person who breeds, reproduces, releases, or causes to disperse or escape from confinement any of the lists on the 3rd scheduled species shall be guilty of an offence. And for plants, I suppose, and this is the one most people kind of draw their attention to, you know, if you plant any of those species, if you cause them to be dispersed or allow or cause dispersal or spread or otherwise cause them to grow, you could be guilty of an offence. And I suppose allowing or causing to disperse is interesting. If you're doing nothing, and that plant is spreading naturally, are you allowing that to be dispersed and being an offence? So therefore the interpretation is you must be controlling these species. If a charge is brought against you, I suppose, just to say in your defence, you must show that you took all reasonable steps and exercised all due diligence to avoid committing that offence. So, you know, you should be able to show you are trying to do something about it. And therefore, I suppose, really, it's about, well, let's identify your risks, whether that's at work or that's at play. What am I doing that might be an issue? And I suppose in the aquatic environment, certainly, look, we could be doing surveying for research, surveying for our monitoring, and that can present a risk if you're going from one site to another. If you're doing water maintenance in the water or on the riparian zone, that machinery, that equipment, even personnel going in and out, that could be causing an issue. You know, if you're spreading something perhaps downstream or going from one water body to another, again, like the crayfish plague, if that can persist for 21 days on something that's damp, that's a big risk in moving between sites. Anything in the recreation environment, really, there's, well, boating activities, angling activities, even hiking, and moving along. Sorry, there's an image there of it's actually the sole of a boot with a killer shrimp from somebody who would have been kind of wading in an area and the shrimp stuck on the boot, you know, and can be transported that way. But we're also thinking of seeds if you're working along the riverside area. And again, just considering about what equipment might be moving in and out in your vehicles. So what we're saying is, look, we need to engage with people. It is a call to action. You know, you want people to kind of take this on board, to look at the biosecurity campaigns, to report sightings, to take action on invasives and to report those actions. And just to say the bee plant wise campaign, it's all online, but really we're saying is, look, know what you grow, like avoid planting invasive species. Not all of them are regulated. As in banned from sale. You know, if you do have something in your garden and it looks like it's taking over, dispose of it properly or try and control it. Don't allow it to jump the fence, essentially. And where you are controlling or cutting back, you know, to compost with care, not to let anything be shared or shared around or spread further. And we will hopefully in the coming months have good guidance on what you can or cannot compost for some of the high risk invasive plants. And with pets, because they are an issue for the aquatic environment, like we had the koi poo, like we had pond sliders, and fish species as well. Basically, we're saying don't ever release your pet to the wild. I mean, it could be harmful to them, but also to other wildlife. And that pet traders have a role in that too. And we will be engaging again in the coming months and year with the trading community to work on that. And just some examples again, and these species are regulated under the European concern, and they are ones we have in Ireland. Koi poo can certainly take off, has the potential to establish and have a big impact. These slider species, these pond turtle species, are turning up a lot in our parks, in our canals, some rivers and lakes. They're not known to be able to reproduce in Ireland at the moment, but look, with future climate change, who knows? But they are regulated, and they can have a very localized impact. So then finally, I suppose there is the check, clean, dry campaign. And really, this is one that is adopted in Britain. It was one that came from New Zealand originally. If you go near the water at all, your gear, your equipment, anything, really, it's about checking it, giving it a thorough cleaning, ideally in hot water, at least 45 degrees Celsius. Yeah, and drying it is the most important. When we're dealing with aquatic species, desiccation kills. If something, to leave it dry and have it dry for at least 48 hours. In Ireland, look, that might not always be possible given some of the summers we have or the days we get if you're trying to dry outside. So we would say, look, disinfection has a role to play, but that will have a very limited application and effectiveness. So, but it does have a role. But really, look, if drying is very important. And again, look, we're an island. And I suppose when we think of our river basins and our catchments, you know, I suppose, you know, we have our canals that are connecting places that wouldn't naturally be connected to. And once anything gets into the Shannon catchment, you know, there is a great network where it can spread beyond that. And so we need to address it at that level. And I thought just for this group in particular, I wanted to highlight what you may not have heard of, I'm not sure yet or not, is the quagga mussel, which was first recorded in Ireland in July 2021. And I suppose it's almost like the poster child zebra mussel was of the 90s, but worse. And I'll just present some information here from Jan Robert Barres and his colleagues on work they did in recent years. So this in the top picture shows a juvenile quagga mussel on the thumb of a person. They can be tiny. They'll attach to propellers of boats, of hull of boats, and even to planks. And so they can be transported in many ways into Ireland and around Ireland. And from a study in 2022, when they surveyed the areas, you know, they showed it was at an exponential phase of invasion, they believed, an enormous increase in densities, up to 32,000 per metre square. I mean, it's incredible in Lough Derg, in shallow areas. They can settle on soft sediments in lakes and river sections of the Shannon, unlike the zebra mussel, something the zebra mussel has not done and native species do not do. So a new, I suppose, an invader into a novel environment for us here in Ireland. It's also settling deeper in lakes than other species. It is showing it displacing zebra mussel on natural substrates, which is interesting. And just these images here, and again, look, you have a copy of the presentation. I'm happy to circulate afterwards. But the open circles, I suppose, is showing where they're absent, and those full or black circles was where it was present. And just between 2021 and 2022, again, the black circles is the difference in the presence in 1 year, which is incredible, and showing a moderate or a high level of density in those areas. And what we can say is, look, that the impact of them is likely to be severe based on the current densities that they have seen boats are a vector, I suppose, of that spread. And that's an incredibly high risk of movement throughout the catchment and throughout the Shannon catchment and beyond it. And that we need concerted action really to reduce the risk of spread beyond the Shannon. And it's not just aquatic species. Say, look, we're talking about a riparian and one we've seen like the giant hogweed, which is still increasing in its distribution. I suppose I just want to say this was a site with these circles here that I used to visit now and then to collect some specimens for doing workshops, and it was the odd plant here and there. And I hadn't visited the site for 2 years, and when I went back, hundreds and hundreds of it. That's the River Bride down in County Cork, and it's spreading further downstream. And again, a bit of action early on would have reduced this happening, would have prevented the risk of this happening. Another one, again, that's a lot of our riparian areas is Himalayan balsam. Again, one that only has a seed bank of 2 years, that is easy for control without the need for herbicides. You know, there would be some health and safety considerations, again, working along riparian areas, but because it has a very shallow root, it is a good one that you can use for these Himalayan balsams, where you can get communities or volunteers involved in eradicating it from areas. And again, this is just some images of local action groups, some of them involved in balsam bashing, as they would call it. And I just provided a link there. Now, this is a link in GB, but it just goes through a step-by-step of doing a balsam bash if people haven't done one before. And I suppose another area that's very important really is for citizen science in recording and monitoring invasive species. This map is just showing all records of invasive species in our national database. Actually, of all records in our database on biodiversity map, citizens, the general public have a huge role to play in the knowledge, in sharing the knowledge of our biodiversity and knowing what's where, and particularly on invasive species. So having an ability for them to know if you see something and to report it is very important. Over half, so this is just some pictures of some of the species alerts that have been issued over the years. So these are detections of species that weren't in Ireland or had a very rare occurrence, and you would want to respond quickly to them to eradicate where possible. And I just want to say that the majority of these were first reported by the general public, and that even includes the oak processionary moth that was found in a couple of trees in the last number of years and quickly removed by Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, because they also would have a health impact. So, you know, it's really very key to get the general public involved. We have some species that are for alerts that we would want people to be aware of and to report as soon as possible. I think what's important to note, you don't need to be a taxonomic expert. If you notice something unusual, something that's very different in the Irish landscape and you're concerned, report it. provide a photo if at all possible. I suppose we can do very little if we don't have that, you know, to take it further for verification. And to try and kind of, I suppose, figure out what it is when reporting it. If a species is reported as one of our alert species, it will trigger alert within an hour to get that information to us. And we will try to work and have it verified, and if verified, to alert the relevant authorities. And so just to say, there's an online recording form, and really it's just saying, look, who, what, when and where was recorded. And there's also an app, the Biodiversity Data Capture app. But then what? So a species has been detected, a species has been reported and verified. So then it's about, well, managing invasive species. And just to say, in Ireland, I suppose management and control of invasive species is the responsibility of the landowner. And that may not be widely kind of made clear. And often, I suppose, we get emails in and they're concerned about it's on my neighbour's property, or it's in this area, or the council aren't doing anything about it, or whatever it is, you know. And often we would say, well, the first thing is, well, look, is the landowner aware that this invasive species is on their site? They might not be aware. They might not be aware that it is invasive, or indeed that it is regulated. So one of the union concerned species, or a third scheduled species in Irish law. So often it's a case of perhaps making the landowner aware of that species and the responsibility that goes with it. If it is a case that they are aware, or they have been notified and action isn't being taken, as we saw earlier on from the law, you know, you can report that. I suppose report it to NPWS, would say to An Garda Síochána, or to the NPWS ranger, to seek information on that enforcement. And just to say, I suppose we get a lot of queries on Japanese knotweed, and we have answers to frequently asked questions available from that link as well, which might kind of guide people on what action to take. And just say these union concerned species again. So this first lot here, you know, we are aiming to eradicate these if possible in Ireland, otherwise to manage them, to minimise their impact and contain them. And for some others, really, it is about early detection. We would seek that people report them without delay, so eradication can be undertaken. And the exception, I suppose, above really would be Chinese mitten crab, that is still an alert species. And we say, like, you know, what can we do to deal with invasive species? There's a lot happening already. And I think there's a lot happening, but people aren't aware of it. You know, there's an awful lot of work happening at the community level, at the council level. There's an awful lot of research happening. There is kind of policy being developed on it all the time, but it's not always known. But I suppose what we're seeing now is an awful lot more action plans coming up, whether they're county action plans for biodiversity or for invasive species, and even local area action plans. And I think they're a great way to help guide what action you take to kind of plan for that. The data centre do have a website called actionforbiodiversity.ie, and it is for the biodiversity action plans. So I suppose you can go up and search by county what action plans have been loaded there, and take some inspiration perhaps. And there's other information really in guiding your activities. And just, I suppose, for local community areas, and I'm not sure how it's organised in River Trust, perhaps at that River Trust area, what we would say for invasive species, the first thing is, what do we have? So to survey for them, to signpost for those in particular, to let people know that they're there. That is very important, where they are known. So particularly for like the giant hogweed or the Japanese knotweed, where you don't want people to cut them or go near them. But even just beyond that, look, we do have this aquatic invader in our river system. Please, if you are fishing or recreating in this area, or working, whatever, take action not to prevent it further. You know, so little signposting in that regard. Have a plan in place how to manage it. Collaboration is key, particularly in the aquatic environment, as you will know. You know, when you're looking at a catchment level, or you're looking at trying to control something downstream, and if it's going to keep having a source population upstream that will continue to invade downstream, then your efforts may be futile, you know, so collaboration is important. And it's about monitoring, and I think people don't realise how much effort is required after clearing an area. Something like Himalayan balsam, you're looking at least 2 years because of the seed bank. Others could take 5, 6 or more years of monitoring to see if anything pops back up again, and to be prepared to tackle it again, you know. And often that's having the will and the mindset that we might need to go at this again, and not to feel defeated about it, but just to know you may need to go at it again. And restoration is very important, I suppose, if needed. In some instances, it's not. Nature will do a great job of restoring itself. Look, there is a need to report sightings. There is actually a requirement to report action on invasives for those European concerned species. That is an obligation. And community awareness is key to everything that we do on invasives as well. And just any consideration is health and safety, particularly the aquatic environment, having a risk assessment. What impact could your actions have on non-target species? Biosecurity is, I suppose, key to all of this as well. And if in doubt, to contact, the local NPWS ranger and look at for disposal and licenses as well, just to make sure offences aren't being committed and see where authorisations are needed in any work. I'd like to say just a little bit about the Actions on Invasives portal. The rationale for its development, I say, is because we are required to report on actions on the Union Concerned Species, because we need to know what's happening with the National Concerned Species as well. And under the Local Biodiversity Action Fund, it is a requirement from this year on, a condition of that funding, to report any work on invasives into the portal as well. And it'll do a lot of things. Look, it'll help track resources going into the landscape. It'll give recognition for the work. It's a communication tool, I suppose, to show responsible action is being taken. And really, look, it gives that opportunity for engagement and collaboration to see what else is happening in your area. If anybody has done it for pollinators, it's built on the same system as the actions for pollinators. So it's the same system, it's the same sign up if you need it. It's just a different program when you go into it. But just to say, look, it's got the information on who's undertaking that action already. You can go in and filter through it. At the moment, we have 5 key sectors that it's geared up to target. I'm not sure where the river associations would come under. Would it be kind of clubs and associations or local communities? But we might actually talk separately sometime to see if what is there is suitable for river trusts and kind of organisations that you would be involved with or not. And you can go in and you can search, so who's taking the action, what action are they taking, and even what species. And just this is just one example on a community one where you can click on a circle, you can see who it is, and it's very simple information. It doesn't need anything too detailed on what is being done, and it will provide a measure of the area that is under control or whatever action is being taken. And you can upload PDFs, which is very important for additional information. That's a picture of somebody there dealing with giant hogweed. And another one here where they've uploaded where they were delivering an awareness event. And there is just guidance information available on the website. Just to say, I suppose, the National Biodiversity Data Centre, we don't undertake practical management. We don't provide guidance as such. We don't develop guidance directly on control and management of invasive species. It's outside our remit, but we do link to good referenced information there, good source documents. Some of those do come from Britain, so I suppose it's always about being cognizant of what authorisations or permits are kind of needed here in Ireland. But there is kind of good information available there to help guide actions, and that's just a selection of some of them. We do produce information on biosecurity and awareness. And I suppose another thing, and I suppose you would be for your own area kind of very in tune with what funding is available, but it is something people are often interested to know. Like there is the NPWS LBAF funding, there is the Law Pro funding for communities, which is important to make them aware of. And I suppose what we're seeing in other countries, and maybe we're not so good at it here, is looking for corporate sponsorship or volunteer days to get involved as well. So that's a route perhaps to go down. And just other considerations, what's coming soon are new invasive species regulations. So domestic regulations just on invasives in Ireland. They will consolidate existing provisions, but also strengthen and add to them. And we eagerly await those coming, and I think it will be later this summer. We should be seeing that notifications be issued to take action once those regulations are out. And the National Invasive Species Management Plan is in draft. This isn't the programme for government. And really what this will do is set out a framework for how we deal with invasive species in Ireland, looking at coordination, looking at clarifying responsibility, looking at how we can support cooperation and lots of other elements of it. It's paused at the moment just due to capacity, but hopefully that will be something we'll see published next year. And also look in our 4th National Biodiversity Action Plan, there is an outcome there that it is to address it, and at the all island level. And we will have, or we will very shortly now have, a shared island project on biosecurity and invasive alien species kicking off for 5 years across the island, funded by both governments, which is long awaited and delighted to have. So just to summarise, look, invasive species are a major and growing threat. We need to act urgently. Prevention is key. And part of that is everybody identifying our risks and kind of acting accordingly and see where we can influence good practice. And it's very important to be informed. So we have a lot of online information, and hopefully we'll have a biosecurity online course soon. And what we'd like to see there is where could that be kind of instilled, perhaps if you're applying for a rod license, if you're going to have a sporting event, perhaps if you're going to be doing surveying, that they would need to complete that biosecurity online course first. And just say it is a whole of government, whole of society approach, as in the National Biodiversity Action Plan, and engaging people is key to that. Look, biosecurity, I could harp on, but look, it is very important, and I feel it can't be optional. The risks are too high. And just as a summary point, there's an article here, and it was in Italy, where there was a river that had been studied for about 200 years. And what they found is an almost complete turnover in that community from native to non-native species in that riverine ecosystem. And again, it's kind of being cognizant of the fact we see that trend of introductions in Ireland. We see the number of species coming in over the last 20 years, the last 100 years. What cumulative effect does that have beyond our lifetime, that eventually are we going to have a bit of the same everywhere? Invasive species